Good evening, Papua New Guinea, and thank you for joining us for another edition of Business PNG. We continue our coverage of the recent Forum Economic Ministers meeting in Suva as we discuss exclusively with Adeang Taylor about the outcomes of the proposed Pacific Resilience Fund. Expectations that the recent Forum Economic Ministers would endorse the design of a new Pacific Climate Fund at their annual meeting were short-lived, with the ministers instead issuing a call for more work before they reconvened at a special meeting in July. Secretary General for the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat, Adeang Taylor, acknowledged that there was still work to be done before the PRF would be ready.
So the Pacific Resilience Facility is a facility, and the concept is that we set up a fund where money is spent on helping our countries to be prepared for climatic impact, but also from natural disasters. And looking at where are the gaps in financing, and you have a lot of the big multilaterals in the region funding large infrastructure, but it's the smaller infrastructure, particularly where communities live, like your community halls, like your medical centres, like the jetties where boats come in, all these places that are important for survival of communities and making sure that they are well prepared and refitted to withstand cyclones, to withstand big storms, withstand tsunami. Well, tsunami, that's pretty catastrophic, I know. But to have communities better prepared, so put the money up front rather than waiting for something to happen and then waiting for donors and everybody to come in to help. Some governments in the Pacific are already addressing this. But it's making sure that we have a fund where countries can draw on to be able to do this. I think it's the idea came from discussions amongst ministers in 2017, and it's interesting. I see multilateral banks now trying to fill that space. That's good. Drawing on the ideas that came out of the FEMM and out of the work that the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat has done. Now, there was no decision on the aspects that we had hoped that ministers would make decisions on. Ministers asked for a bit more time to consider, and there'll be a special meeting of finance or economic ministers in July to be able to move this forward.
She detailed some of the specific areas on which clarification is being sought. She said that there's still some clarification on resilience and preparedness and post-recovery, and that those were the concepts discussed with the ministers. The Pacific Resilience Facility is a climate financing initiative by Forum members, specifically targeting small-scale efforts for strengthening infrastructure resilience. The proposed facility is unique in that it is intended to fill a current climate finance gap by assisting Pacific communities, businesses, and governments to climate-proof infrastructure, such as schools, jetties, and ports, before disaster strikes. Despite the delay in finalizing the design of the PRF, Adeang was satisfied with the outcome of FEMM. Among other measures, the ministers agreed that civil society organizations be given a permanent place at their annual meeting and oversaw the launch of a new procurement portal, which will add to transparency surrounding tenders led by the Pacific governments and intergovernmental agencies.
We did have representation with the Ambassador, High Commissioner Lucy Bogari, who is accredited to the Pacific Island Forum. So I was very pleased to have her there and have her interventions. At ministerial level and senior treasury level, yes, there were reasons, as you know, because of the vote of no confidence, we didn't have treasury there. I just think that Papua New Guinea has much to contribute. And that's why I would like to see at high levels, particularly from the economic portfolios, that attendance at FEMM would be enriching for others to hear of Papua New Guinea's experience. There was also a very interesting discussion about the superannuation funds and how they've got together across the Pacific. They're going to set up a secretariat in New Zealand and look for co-investments. So I think that Papua New Guinea superannuation funds also have a lot to contribute to these kinds of dialogues. So I was very, I had hoped that we would have had a minister here, but it was not to be, and we'll wait for the next FEMM.
I'm Leanne Durari in Port Moresby, and you're watching Business PNG. Welcome back to the show. Joining discussions at the Finance and Economic Ministers meeting was the Pacific Islands Private Sector Organization, who brought to the table issues such as climate insurance for Pacific businesses, as well as a potential travel card, similar to the APAC travel card.
An alarming number of private sector businesses in the region are not currently insured against climate disasters. This was discussed at the recent Forum Economic Ministers meeting in Suva. With increasing numbers of more intense disasters, the price of insurance has been rising, and in some places, insurance companies no longer offer any cover at all. Without insurance, firms risk the next disaster being their last day in business. The Pacific Private Sector Organization, or PIPSO, which represents businesses across the region, asked the Forum Economic Ministers to consider setting up a mechanism to assist the private sector in accessing affordable insurance. PIPSO board member Stephen Lyon raised this concern during a press conference after the Forum Economic Ministers' dialogue with the private sector.
The Pacific Islands Private Sector Organisation is an organisation that has on its council one national private sector organisation from each country. So that would be a country-appointed role. The country itself designates the national private sector organisation, and that organisation then becomes the member of the Pacific Islands Private Sector Organisation. Under each of those national private sector organisations sits the businesses of those individual states. Many small businesses don't proactively enrol in programs to be included in a formal membership, but national private sector organisations work on behalf of and represent all businesses within their economies. Our economies are extremely vulnerable to climatic events, just as our societies are, and the quicker that business gets back to business after an event, either by not being as damaged or by being able to access insurance and remediation work more quickly, means that our economies get back to action quicker. People get their jobs back, people get paid, and the country develops and rolls on. So the private sector is put on the table that we need to be included more in those discussions around how we access climate financing, including the Green Climate Fund and others, in order to build a more resilient private sector, which of course contributes to a more resilient society. On top of that, in the same sphere, is access to insurance. We see in the region, access to insurance cover is becoming more and more difficult. Products are becoming more expensive, and as severity of storms increases, insurance companies tend not to underwrite the most severe events in any reasonable way. So we've asked the Forum to look at the mechanisms possible for governments to assist the private sector in accessing a reasonably affordable insurance for the coverage we need to be able to recover from events that could affect our economies.
Mr. Lyon explained that although insurance companies are providing coverage, that coverage is likely to become more expensive in the future, making it even harder for Pacific businesses to secure coverage.
We talk about insurance penetration as how many businesses are insured, and the Pacific is very low in general. Around 12% was the number that was given today for Fiji. So when you consider only 12% of your businesses carry insurance, that is a huge exposure, particularly in the face of increased severity of storm events. This hasn't been costed. The insurance industry exists and is currently providing coverage, but that coverage is becoming more expensive. So it's not so much that it is stopping suddenly. The concern we see is a forecast that if we do continue to get more severe storm events, that it will be harder and harder to underwrite against those, and that will end up having a more adverse economic impact. So it hasn't been sized as such, particularly at the regional scale, but we look at it more from the philosophical perspective of what will happen as insurance companies need to start to reevaluate their risk.
One of the main issues raised by the PIPSO was the need for more involvement of private sectors in climate financing initiatives, including the proposed Pacific Resilience Facility, which is still in its design phase.
I think for the private sector, there isn't a lot of funding available. In fact, it's the opposite. The private sector generally doesn't look for funding as such. We look for access to finance and equity. The funding avenues available to governments and civil society are quite different than the private sector. Most funding agencies won't work to for-profit organisations. So in that sense, we struggle a little bit. And that's why we do want to be involved in the GCF talks, because the GCF, the Green Climate Fund, specifically has mechanisms for private sector. But generally speaking, there isn't a lot of money actually out there for private sector development. There are bits and pieces, but it's not extensive. Everything the Pacific can do to strengthen itself for resilience is necessary. We have to do our own organic stuff in each country. Regionally, these facilities are more powerful because we support each other as states. And when we get contributions from outside the region, it just bolsters our ability to be more aligned in the future. So we absolutely welcome any of that work to help shore up our societies and economies.
Other areas of concern for the PIPSO is the need for a Pacific Business Travel Card. This would be similar to the APAC Business Travel Card, which facilitates short-term business travel within the APAC region by streamlining the entry process into APAC economies.
The next area of concern that we've raised is the need for a business travel card or a foreign business travel card. This is of significant interest to many of our members because of the difficulty in obtaining visas to travel easily throughout the Pacific. There are business people that, in fact, some of you media may have similar issues. There are people that wish to travel from one country to another, but because of the transit points, you need visas and that can take some time. It makes doing business difficult, working across the region, and it's a barrier that can be resolved. The APEC card is a similar mechanism between the APEC member states. So this isn't something new, but we would like to see something similar designed and implemented within the Pacific so that Pacific business people and associated types of persons can apply in advance through that system to get all their visas cleared, and that card then allows them access to those member states.
I'm Leanne Durari in Brisbane, and you're watching Business PNG. Pacific Island civil society organizations took a seat at this year's Finance and Economic Ministers meeting. In this segment, we take a look at what those agendas are.
Pacific civil society organizations emerged jubilant from their dialogue with foreign economic ministers. After more than a decade campaigning for more consultation, they have achieved approval for a permanent place in the ministers' annual meeting. Deputy Executive Director of the Pacific Islands Association of Non-Government Organizations, Emmeline Siale Ilolahia, said the decision meant the FEMM CSO dialogue would be a permanent fixture instead of a result of an invitation.
This is the third time the civil society had a dialogue with the FEMM leaders. The first two, we had been in the space asking for two things. As civil society, we always want to make sure that there are things that we bring to the table that are often a bit not seen from a sane point of view from the community, and we felt that that's basically our role.
Ms. Ilolahia said the decision reflected the economic minister's recognition of a new maturity in the work of the CSO sector. She said this was further reflected in the minister's request for advice from the CSOs on human trafficking issues and gender-based violence issues. The CSOs were also happy with the positive response to the proposal for a region-wide study into the economic cost of violence against women and girls, and to the request to be included in the governance of the proposed new Pacific Resilience Facility.
We had demonstrated that there are studies that has already been done in a UN Women's forecasting that violence against women in terms of the economic cost of countries to address it. In New Zealand and Australia is equivalent to something like 4.7 million New Zealand dollars. If New Zealand is not doing anything about it in the next 10 years, it will be around $80 billion. So we were using those statistics to show that there are a huge burden vested in the countries if they're not doing anything about it. And also request, Fiji has in the study has the estimated to about 498 Fiji dollars in 2011. And what we were happy about that even the representative from Fiji acknowledged how they had used the study to inform the program that they're running now to address the issue of violence against women. So we are asking for that study to be endorsed by the FEMM leaders so we can be able to do that across the rest of the country in our Pacific, to be better informed of the economic cost associated with violence.
The ministers decided more work needs to be done on the design of the PRF before it is ready to go to the forum leaders for approval. They will hold a special meeting in July to review that progress.
And that's all we have for this episode of Business PNG. For more information, or if you would simply like to view this episode again, visit EMTV online at the URL at the bottom of your screen, or to simply join the conversation, like our page on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter at the Twitter handle at Business PNG. Until next week, have a pleasant evening. I'm Rian Jarari, and this was Business PNG.